Hello, my name is Chris Hart. I'm a professor at Texas Woman's University, and this is a presentation that I put together with one of my students, Kelsey Barnacle, and it's a presentation about a project we carried out in a class. It's titled "We Wrote the Book on That," and it's about a project in which we as a class actually wrote a book. So the class was a senior seminar at Texas Woman's University. The seminar was titled Psychology of Deception. It had approximately 30 students in the class. And we took kind of a unique student managed class format. And so the students actually decided what the assignments in the class were going to be, how the class would be conducted, how many points each assignment would be worth. In addition, the students managed the day-to-day operations of the class, assigned different students to give presentations on different days, managed the flow of the discussions, and in addition, the students actually graded all of the assignments in the class. And so it was a distributed peer grading format. And so as the professor, my job was more of a managerial role to a certain degree, but tried to remain as hands-off as possible and isolate my role to primarily facilitating conversations and discussions in the class. And so for the class, for the seminar, it's fairly customary to have a large project at the end of the semester, typically a paper. We decided to kind of mix up that standard approach, and after some discussion, we decided we would endeavor to actually write and publish a book on deception. And so we reviewed a number of edited volumes and decided an edited volume would be an appropriate book format where students would collaborate in very small groups to generate chapters, and then we would pull all of these chapters together into an edited volume. So the first step was deciding who was going to do what. So there's obviously a lot of roles involved in creating an edited volume, and again, it was a student managed class, so I wasn't going to handle all of that business. And so the class came together and decided on the structure for this project, and they decided that they would have an editorial team, and it would be headed by a chief editor. And then the remainder of the people in the class would serve as authors of the various chapters that would be in this edited volume. And so the way they handled it was the students who were interested in serving on the editorial team self-nominated themselves. They would each have to give a brief presentation about why they thought they would be an effective person to have on the editorial team. And we had discussions about, probably people with a track record of leadership and a track record of getting the freaking job done and getting it done effectively would probably be good. And so each person who was interested in being on the editorial team gave a presentation about themselves and their background and their interests and why they thought they would be an effective editor. And then the class voted on who they wanted to be on the editorial team. And they ended up selecting one chief editor and then 3 additional people to serve on the editorial team. And so once the editorial team was in place, the larger process of developing the book came into play. And so as a group, there was a discussion about which topics would be covered. So what would the nature of each chapter be? Then there was the assignment of topics, and by and large, students were able to select to be authors of either their first or second choice of chapters. And we typically had a couple of students writing each chapter. We laid out deadlines. We discussed examples of the writing style we would be using for this book. And then we also talked about the editorial process. So, the authors of each chapter would write a draft of an outline, and then they would submit it to their editors. And so, since we had actually 4 editors, the chief editor and then 3 additional editors, each editor handled or managed a few of the chapters that were being written. And it was an iterative process. The authors would submit outlines, then they would submit drafts, and then more developed drafts, and so forth. And so it was a back and forth process between the editors and the authors, a lot of writing and rewriting. And then finally, once each of the author groups had their chapters in a pretty good state, the editorial staff came together and put the entire book together. And so we wanted to publish this book, and so we found an outlet through Amazon Kindle's direct publishing service. And so through this service, Amazon Kindle provides you a format or kind of a template to generate your book, and then you just plug in all of the elements, and it's a fairly straightforward process. I won't say it was simple. There's a lot of details that have to be attended to, but it was fairly manageable for our chief editor, a single student, to organize almost all of this publication process. There is no cost associated with publishing it, so the students didn't actually have to do any to come up with any funds, and neither did I, which was nice. And then there were royalties that are generated. So with each copy of the book that's sold, royalties were generated. We discussed what we would do with the royalties and decided just for the ease of me managing money, we decided to publish the book and sell the book at cost. So if you go on Amazon, you can actually still buy this book, and you buy it at cost. And so we don't actually generate any revenues that we had to worry about how to distribute. But we discussed, things like perhaps donating them to a Psi-Chi organization or something along those lines. And so once we got everything uploaded, the editors at Amazon looked at it for a couple of days, made a couple of suggestions about formatting issues, and then it was put up for publication. And so you can see it's offered for $3.82, a bargain. You should go out and buy a copy today. The reason it's so inexpensive is no one's generating any profits off of this, except obviously Amazon's probably taking a small cut. So we put the book up for sale, and we looked at it just today. We continue to sell a few copies here and there. I think probably initially most of the copies that were being purchased were probably by students who had been co-authors on the book, and I bought a couple for myself even. And it turned out really nice. The book is a really nice. We decided to sell it as a paperback. Amazon does a really good job of producing a very professional looking book. The cover art was actually done by the sister of one of the editors for the book, and then and it's if you picked it up off a shelf, you'd have no idea that this was a book self-published by students in a senior seminar class. It's a very professional looking book. So some of the challenges that we ran into with this project, obviously in a class of 30 psychology students, you're going to have a lot of variability and writing skills. And so dealing with that, we wanted some consistency in the writing quality. So we had standards, and the editors decided how to maintain those standards. But there were some challenges. Some of the students who were weaker writers really struggled, and I think felt the feedback was a little harsh. Perhaps they weren't accustomed to their writing being held to that high of a standard. The deadlines were also a bit of an issue. We had numerous deadlines. So we had deadlines for the outline for a chapter, then deadlines for a very rough draft, and then deadlines for each subsequent draft. And they really came pretty quickly. And the reason they came pretty quickly is because our timeline was very condensed. We didn't start working on this project until about a quarter of the way through the semester, and due to the time required to put everything together and create the published book, we actually had to have everybody's drafts of their chapters in fairly quickly. And so it was a very crunched timeline, and that stressed out a lot of students as well. As I mentioned, this was a student-managed class, and the editors served as the people who provided feedback about the writing. I did not. And some students, I think, bristled at the idea of other students giving them feedback on their writing. And anytime there was any kind of contention or disagreement, they would bring it to me, and I would always intervene. But those instances were actually really minimal. One issue was we had decided early on, if a student turned in work that was not of the quality we expected for this book, they would still get a grade. It was a graded assignment, but we wouldn't include their chapter in the book. And there were a couple of students whose work just didn't rise to the level of expectations that the editorial staff had. And so we rejected their book. Obviously, there were some hurt feelings around that. But we did decide at the outset this wasn't just a class activity. We were publishing a book, and with books there are editorial standards. Some of the benefits and successes, obviously a lot of student autonomy. The students organized, wrote, generated, and published this book. So I think they derived a lot of satisfaction out of completing this on their own. The sense of purpose. Writing a book feels a lot different than writing a paper. And so the students were very enthusiastic about their writing assignment actually having some end goal that was, kind of a tangible goal at the end. It was self-selected as far as the degree of participation. Some students didn't want to they wanted to do as little as they had to on the project, and so they could self-select into those roles. On the other hand, there were other students who wanted to achieve greater things and seize on leadership opportunities, and they tended to gravitate toward the editorial staff. There was also an expanded scale of writing challenges. The editors actually had to edit a book, so they were each very accomplished writers in their own right, but they didn't actually do any writing. They managed and edited other people's writing, and so it allowed them to grow in some unique ways as well. Obviously, the tangible outcome, the students each have a copy of a book that they helped co-author. And I think there was a lot of pride that came along with that outcome. Some of the keys to bringing this project to successful fruition. First of all, we had a lot of student buy-in. The students voted on and decided that this would be their task in the class. So they're all very invested because it was something they had chosen to do, not something that I had forced upon them. There was a lot of flexibility. Students could pick what they wrote about, their topics. They could pick whether they're going to be an editor or a writer. If they were going to be on the editorial staff, they had some discussions about what their roles would be in the editorial staff. And so I think offering students that flexibility was a real key to the success. They seemed to appreciate that. And then the very strong editorial staff. I think this project probably would have failed had we not had such a strong editorial staff. And my co-author for this presentation, Kelsey Barnacle, was really the linchpin that brought it all together. She was an exceptional editor and really managed this project so professionally and was really the key to this project's success. So that's our project and our presentation we wrote the book on on that. And thanks for your time. I hope you found this interesting. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to shoot me an email. Thanks.